Hello students, in part 3 of life processes, I have explained digestive system, and today in this video I am going to explain respiration. Now what is respiration? It is a catabolic process. Catabolic process. Now what is catabolic process? Catabolic process means it's a process in which energy is released. So it's a catabolic process. During the process, breakdown of glucose occurs with the liberation of energy, and this energy is generally liberated in the form of ATP. Clear? So respiration is it is a catabolic process in which stepwise breakdown of respiratory substrate, mainly it is glucose, occurs with the liberation of energy in the form of ATP. Now what is respiration? It is clear, and this reaction, it takes place inside the cell. That's why this is also known as cellular respiration. Now why it is called so? Because this respiration reaction where glucose breaks to liberate energy in the form of ATP, it occurs within the cell, and that's why it is called cellular respiration. Now during photosynthesis we have seen plants prepare their food which is in the form of glucose or starch. Even when humans and other organisms we digest food, after the digestion the carbohydrates they convert to glucose, and this glucose must be broken to liberate energy, and using this energy only we can do our work. So the process by which this glucose is broken inside the cell, that process is respiration. Now depending upon the presence of oxygen, two types of respiration are found. One is called aerobic respiration, another is called anaerobic respiration. Now when it requires oxygen, when the process of respiration requires oxygen, then that process is called aerobic respiration. Whereas when this respiration occurs in the absence of oxygen, then it is called anaerobic respiration. Different organisms use different ways to break down food material, mainly glucose, to release energy. Some organisms use oxygen to break down glucose completely into carbon dioxide and water, whereas some organisms use other pathways that do not involve oxygen. And then when oxygen is not needed, we use the term anaerobic, and when oxygen is used, then we call it aerobic respiration. During digestion, carbohydrates converts into glucose. All of you know this because already I have explained in my previous video. Whatever glucose is formed in the small intestine, those glucose molecules will be absorbed by the blood capillaries, and blood will carry this glucose to different parts of the body. Now when blood carries this glucose will move from blood into the cells by a process of diffusion, and once it will go inside the cell, it converts into one molecule which is called pyruvic acid or pyruvate, and during the process small amount of energy is released. Clear? So the glucose molecule, whatever is flowing in the blood, it will enter from blood capillaries into the cell. Once it enters, this glucose molecule breaks to form pyruvate molecule. This is also known as pyruvic acid, and during the process small amount of energy is also released. And this process in which glucose breaks to form pyruvate, this is called glycolysis, and it takes place in the cytoplasm. It occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell, and during this process no oxygen is required. So this is the first step of respiration. Now what will happen to the pyruvate? That depends on the presence of oxygen. If sufficient oxygen is present, then this pyruvate molecule, which is also known as pyruvic acid, enters inside the mitochondria, where it is completely oxidized in different steps to form carbon dioxide, water, with the liberation of energy in the form of ATP. So in case of aerobic respiration, where first step, when glucose converts to pyruvate, this is called glycolysis, and when pyruvate converts to carbon dioxide, water and energy inside the mitochondria, this process is also known as Krebs cycle. Altogether 38 ATP molecules are produced by oxidation of 1 gram mole of glucose. So it liberates large amount of energy. So aerobic respiration liberates maximum amount of energy, When glucose, after entering inside the cell, it converts into pyruvate, which is also known as pyruvic acid, and during the process small amount of energy is released. And in the first step, no oxygen is required and it takes place in the cytoplasm. And if oxygen is present, without oxygen the second step will not take place. So if oxygen is present, then pyruvate, in the presence of oxygen, it will break inside the mitochondria to produce carbon dioxide, water, and it will liberate some amount of energy. So altogether in this process, 38 ATP molecules are formed by oxidation of 1 gram mole of glucose. Now if you write the reaction, glucose, which is C6H12O6, it will enter inside the cell and it will break in the form of pyruvic acid. This is the formula of pyruvic acid. This process of breaking of glucose into pyruvic acid is called glycolysis, and it occurs in the cytoplasm, and as I told you, during the process no oxygen is required. And now if oxygen is present, this pyruvic acid will enter inside the mitochondria, and this second step is known as the Krebs cycle, and during the process oxygen is required. If oxygen is not present in sufficient quantity, pyruvic acid will not enter inside the mitochondria. So when oxygen is present in sufficient quantity, this pyruvic acid will enter inside the mitochondria, where there are series of reactions, and after the reactions it is going to form carbon dioxide, water, and energy. So if we combine this energy plus this energy, total energy is around 38 ATP molecules, and these 38 ATP molecules are produced by oxidation of 1 gram mole of glucose. In case of anaerobic respiration also, initially glucose converts to pyruvic acid and small amount of energy in cytoplasm, and here no oxygen is required, and you know this process is called glycolysis. So this is similar to the previous case. Once pyruvic acid is formed, and since in each cells very less oxygen, or you can say it is the absence of oxygen, this pyruvic acid will not enter inside the mitochondria. Rather, this pyruvic acid will convert into ethyl alcohol, carbon dioxide, and very small amount of energy, around 2 ATP energy, in the cytoplasm only. Okay, so the second part also, like first step, will take place in the cytoplasm, where pyruvic acid will break to form ethyl alcohol, which is C2H5OH, carbon dioxide, that is CO2, and a very small amount of energy, 2 ATP. This reaction will take place in the cytoplasm only. It is not going to enter inside the mitochondria. And this is also referred as fermentation in yeast. Sometimes anaerobic respiration occurs in muscle cells when there is a lack of oxygen. Like previous reaction, here also glucose will first of all convert into pyruvic acid in the cytoplasm, and during the process no oxygen is required, and the process is called glycolysis. When there is a lack of oxygen in the muscle cells, then this pyruvic acid will convert into lactic acid in the cytoplasm, and during the process very less amount of energy is released, and this build-up of lactic acid in our muscles causes muscular cramps. So while doing muscular activities, we should not do it very fast, otherwise build-up of lactic acid will take place in our muscle cells, and as a result we may suffer from muscular cramps. The energy that is released during the cellular respiration is immediately used to synthesize an energy-rich molecule called ATP. I think all of you know the full form of ATP is adenosine triphosphate, and this ATP is also termed as the energy currency of the cell, as it fuels most cellular processes. The energy that is released during respiration is used to make an ATP molecule from ADP, an inorganic phosphate. ADP means adenosine diphosphate. So the energy that is released, what it will do, here one chemical is there which is called adenosine diphosphate. This ADP will react with inorganic phosphate. This is inorganic phosphate, and as a result this will form ADP and another phosphate, which ultimately forms ATP. Okay, so this ADP will combine with one phosphate molecules and it will form ATP. Endothermic processes in the cell use this ATP to carry out reactions. When the terminal phosphate linkage in ATP is broken, around 30.5 kilojoule per mole of energy is released. So ATP provides energy just like a battery that can be used for various purposes such as lighting a torch, driving a toy, etc. Similarly, ATP can be used for the protein synthesis, contraction of muscle cells and other purposes. Respiration also takes place in plants because they too need energy for different activities like transport of food from leaf to other parts of the plant, transpiration and for other activities. Plants respire by taking in oxygen and giving out carbon dioxide. All the parts of the plant like roots, stem, leaf, all the parts, they respire day and night in order to survive. The rate of respiration is high in actively growing regions like this part and this part, while it is low in mature regions of the plant body. And there is very little transport of gases in plants, unlike animals. And these gases actually entirely move by the process of diffusion. And if you see the cells inside the leaves, the arrangement of cells in a leaf is such that there are many air spaces in it. In this cross section of leaf, you can see numerous intercellular spaces, and these cells are arranged in such a way that there are many air spaces, and in these air spaces gases can move very easily. Here you can see minute pores are there. These gaps are called, or pores are called, stomata, and most of the gases enter and leave the plants through the stomata only. In the daytime, this stomata remains open, but in the night time stomata remains closed. In this figure you can see this gap is called stomatal pore and these two are called the guard cell. When water gets inside the guard cells, the turgor pressure increases and they expand, and as a result stomatal pore opens, and through this gap gases exchange. When these guard cells lose water, the turgor pressure inside these guard cells decreases. This results in the closing of the stomatal pore and gaseous exchange stop. The direction of diffusion of these gases depends upon the environmental condition and the requirements of the plant. At night, there is no photosynthesis because sunlight is not there, so carbon dioxide is eliminated. But during the day, when carbon dioxide is generated during respiration, is used for photosynthesis and there is hardly any release of carbon dioxide. Instead, plants releases excess of oxygen that is generated during photosynthesis. Different organisms have different types of gaseous exchange structures which are designed to suit their habitats. The four main types of respiratory organs that are found, they are body surface or skin, air tubes or trachea, gills and lungs. And animals can breathe in oxygen from the atmosphere, but aquatic animals need to use the oxygen dissolved in water. Since the amount of dissolved oxygen in water is very low as compared to the amount of oxygen in air, so the rate of breathing in aquatic organisms like fish is much faster than that seen in terrestrial organisms.